The weekly post-cabinet media briefing is about to begin at the Diplomatic Center in St. Anne's. We take you there now for live coverage of the event.
Good afternoon, members of the media, wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to this week's post-cabinet press conference. I have with me here today my colleagues, the Attorney General and the Minister in the Ministry of the Attorney General. If you all would allow me, to just lead off with a couple decisions coming out of Cabinet today, and then one item that I'd like to deal with, and then I'll pass it on to the AG and the Minister in the Office of the Attorney General. I am happy to announce that today the Cabinet has taken a decision to grant a parcel of state land with buildings on it to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service Social and Welfare Association. Upon assuming the office of Minister of National Security just about 3 months ago, one of the first meetings I had was with the Police Social and Welfare Association and listened to them on a number of issues that they raised, etc. And this is one of the first items that has been able to be resolved in that short space of time. For many years prior to this administration, the association had been looking for a home. We as a cabinet believe it makes complete sense. We appreciate the job that is done by our police service, the men and women in the police service, and what it is, the stresses and rigors that they go through on a daily basis. So the vision for this is that the Police Social and Welfare Association will now utilize the buildings there, construct an area for their members to come, to exercise, to associate with each other, and basically a safe zone for the police to have wellness in their lives, etc. So I am pleased to be part of an administration, and I thank the Cabinet today for supporting me in taking this decision. For the first time, the Police Social and Welfare Association will have a dedicated parcel of land with buildings for them to go ahead and build their own headquarters and their various wellness facilities and other assets that will assist the police service. The second decision that was taken today over the weekend, not the weekend, earlier this week, there were incidents of taking place in Los Iros in Irin, and with illegal immigrants entering Trinidad and Tobago. And at the time, I had told the population that as Minister of National Security, border security and protection is an important element of what we're working on. And I said that I was taking a number of initiatives to Cabinet in the fulfillment of us trying to secure our borders more effectively. I am pleased to announce today that the Cabinet has supported and has approved and confirmed us getting 14 interceptors for the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard back up and running in the shortest possible time. You all would recall that not too long ago, the Honorable Prime Minister had a visit to the Coast Guard headquarters, and at the time we were told that unfortunately over the years, out of the 25 interceptors, not many of them were working. So immediately we set about doing the necessary analysis, and I've come to Cabinet today, and Cabinet has approved and confirmed that we will get 14 interceptors back up and running, and these boats will be strategically placed along the coastlines of Trinidad and Tobago to help as one part of the fight against our porous borders. These borders have been left porous for too long. You all are aware that we had also approved the upgrading of our radar system, the 360-degree radar system. And even when radars pick up things, we then need the assets in the water to be able to do exactly what it is we expect these interceptors to do. So as soon as these interceptors are back in the water, it will add to the 4 or 5 that we have, will give us at least 20 interceptors or 19 interceptors that can then be strategically placed. We're going to be placing these on the basis of intelligence reports, and they will go a long way in assisting us to make our borders less porous. The other issue that I'd like to discuss with you all today is a decision taken by Cabinet to do with Petrotrin, the Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited. Before I get into that, there has been a rumor circulating and some talk circulating within the last few days with respect to the petrol, the gas that is bought at the pumps in Trinidad and Tobago. As you all are aware, we have unleaded and we have premium unleaded, 92 RON and 98 RON, respectively. Super. And there has been a suggestion that Petrotrin's importation of fuels for the pumps is an inferior fuel, and persons are suggesting that the fuel is being burnt off in the past week or so a lot quicker, etc. This is of complete surprise to us because Petrotrin has only just last night taken, yesterday I'm informed, taken the first delivery of foreign petrol, and none of the petrol that is being sold at the pumps in Trinidad and Tobago as yet is any foreign petrol. They are still utilizing the refined product from Petrotrin. So I'd like to put that to rest and to say that once again it's a distortion of reality, a distortion of the truth, and those persons who are creating mischief, there is no truth to it whatsoever. Additionally, there is absolutely no intention, and nor do I believe it will come to pass that there's going to be any inferior fuel bought to supply to the public of Trinidad and Tobago. But the simple point at this stage is that is a distortion of reality. There is no imported fuel being utilized at the pumps in Trinidad and Tobago at this stage. All of the fuel being supplied at the pumps in Trinidad and Tobago at this stage to the public is fuel that has been processed and refined by Petrotrin. Today, the Cabinet took a decision with respect to the vesting of the assets from Petrotrin. As you all are aware, at every stage as Petrotrin is being restructured, we have come to you all and told you all, the population, what is going on, or Petrotrin has informed you all. Today, the Cabinet took a decision. In law, we're going to the Parliament. We're going to the Parliament next week, Wednesday, to conduct the vesting of all of the assets in Petrotrin to the various entities that have been set up over the past month. Because as you know, on the 30th of November, these various entities that I'll discuss in a short while are going to be running the restructured operations. It also gives me an opportunity to put to rest, and it surprises me how long this distortion of reality continues. At no stage did the Prime Minister, did the chairman of Petrotrin or anyone say that Petrotrin is being shut down. From day one, we've told the population it was the refinery that was being shut down. Petrotrin is not being shut down. What we have and what we had told you all on the last occasion is entities being set up, a holding company, various other entities, one for E&P, another one for the importation and sale of refined products, bunkering, etc. A third new entity that was set up to have the transfer of the refinery assets into that entity. So what can then happen is Petrotrin is going to have a RFP process to the world at large. Anybody who's interested in the refinery that was formerly owned by Petrotrin, it is going to be put in a standalone, quarterized company, a new company set up for that purpose, and Petrotrin is going to invite requests for proposals, and then there will be an evaluation of proposals. This invitation will be to the world. So anybody who's interested in making that refinery a viable entity and has any idea and any backing for it to be done, there is going to be an RFP process set up. You put your proposals in there, and it will be evaluated by the experts, and then a decision taken. The vesting that is about to take place is to transfer and vesting of assets in Petrotrin into 3 new companies as part of the cessation of operations of Petrotrin on November 30th, 2018. These 3 companies, and you've heard them before, are Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, Paria Fuel Trading Company, the Guaracara Refining Company Limited, and that is being done next week, Tuesday, in the House through a vesting act. We are also going to be transferring and vesting certain assets of Palo Seco Agricultural Enterprises Limited, PSAEL, in Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, which is a company that's been established for exploration and production. That too will be done under Vesting Act. We're also going to be transferring and investing in Petrotrin, the non-core assets of the Trinidad and Tobago Oil Company Limited, formerly Trintoc, and the Trinidad and Tobago Petroleum Company Limited, Trintopec. We're going to be transferring and investing assets of Trintoc and Trintopec in Guaracara Refining Company Limited, which is a new company, as you know, that's been established for the refinery operations of Petrotrin. That's what I was just talking about. So all of the refinery operations of Petrotrin are going to be put into that company. We'll then invite requests for proposals. Petrotrin will invite RFPs, and they will then have an evaluation to see if anything that is a business viability can be done to take that forward. And then lastly, we're going to transfer all of the issued and outstanding shares in Petrotrin from the Minister of Finance Corporation Seoul to a new holding company, Trinidad Petroleum Holding Limited. So members of the media, public of Trinidad and Tobago, as you all are aware, there is a restructuring that is taking place and that has been taking place, where at the top, the holding company is the Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited. There's then a company called the Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, another one called, which will deal with E&P, operations, exploration and production, the Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, which is for the refined products that we're now importing for sale at the pumps, Guaracara Refining Company Limited, which is where the refinery assets will be set up, and then of course Petroleum Company, Trinidad and Tobago Limited, Petrotrin, is the fourth subsidiary of this new holding company. So Petrotrin has not been shut down. Petrotrin continues for legacy items and legacy issues to be worked off. You've heard the opposition try to mislead the population, saying that Petrotrin is being shut down to deal with AV drilling. Absolutely not true. Furthest thing from the truth whatsoever. Petrotrin continues to deal with all legacy items. So the new structure envisages exploration and production activities to be undertaken by the new company, Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, which will now be known as Heritage Petroleum, which will be located at Santa Flora and Point Fortin, and will have responsibility for all exploration and production assets, including the E&P contracts with revenue generated through crude sales and crude storage. The terminaling, fuel trading and product supply activities will be undertaken by Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, which will be located in Pointe-a-Pierre and will be responsible for trading and product supply, logistics, terminaling, product handling with Heritage Petroleum. Guaracara Refining Company Limited will be responsible for preservation of the refinery assets which are being mothballed, and there will be an RFP for this entity, in addition to providing utility services to Paria Fuel and Petrotrin. Petrotrin will remain as a member of the group of subsidiaries held by the holding company, Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited. It is necessary to take certain vesting orders and acts to Parliament, which we will be doing next week, Tuesday, to complete all of this month. And that is necessary to give life to the restructured company and entity that I've just spoken at length and in detail about. This will happen in Parliament at the House next week, Wednesday, and it's envisaged shortly thereafter, the following week, the Senate will also do what is necessary to have these vesting orders, acts passed in Parliament to give life to the restructuring plan. There's just one more matter I'd like the opportunity to deal with before I pass over to my colleagues. Once again, the National Nuisance has put out misleading information. I can't even call it a distortion of reality, because there is no reality in it whatsoever to distort. The National Nuisance, who seems to be feeding the members of the media on a 24/7 basis, continues to attempt to mislead the population of Trinidad and Tobago through the media. Coming out of Cabinet, I have just seen something put out by this National Nuisance, and I've never heard somebody describe themselves as I am a former senator, I am a former this. You are whoever you are at the given point in time. The National Nuisance has put out a complete lie to the population of Trinidad and Tobago with respect to the SSA. The director of the SSA continues to be Colonel George Robinson. As anyone knows persons are entitled to leave. Colonel Robinson has not been sent on leave by me as Minister of National Security. He requested leave. He's been granted leave in accordance with the provisions of his contract, and I expect him back out in December. There is no truth whatsoever. He has gone on leave in the past. Other deputy directors have been approved by cabinet to act in the past when he's gone on leave. That continues to be the normal course of conduct as to what is going on at the SSA. This national nuisance has also gone on to say, giving himself an uplift in importance, and I'm not even going to call his name because he's not important, that himself and two of his other colleagues are being monitored, etc. The government is playing absolutely no role. Maybe, unlike the previous administration, this Minister of National Security is not playing any role in the utilization of any of our national security assets. The bodies, the police service, the defense force, the SSA are allowed to do their work. I meet and discuss with them policies. If there are issues that are related to national security, they will bring it to me as they see fit. I receive reports, I receive briefings, as every other Minister of National Security has in the past, as the chairman of the National Security Council does. There is no truth whatsoever into the absolute lies that are being told by this national nuisance with respect to the SSA. The second point I'd like to raise with the media at this stage is, and this is not through any intercept, this is through persons sharing with me, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago sharing with me screenshots that the national nuisance is the person who first sent out this article from businessinsider.com earlier this week, ranking Trinidad and Tobago as the 12th most dangerous place in the world. I would like all civic and right-minded citizens of Trinidad and Tobago once again to put down a marker and to understand that the national nuisance, who operates as an arm of the opposition, continues to try and create a sense of panic in Trinidad and Tobago when we're already dealing with difficult circumstances and we're working hard to make Trinidad and Tobago a more safe and secure place. He is the person that went and found this article in businessinsider.com and began circulating it to members of the media. At the time when I read the article, two things jumped out at me. There was no comparative analysis. If you're ranking persons, what you would do is you'll have objective measurements, and you'd say, okay, so the amount of serious crimes per capita is this, and then when you rank other countries alongside it, you can then have a ranking. That was not done in the article. It jumped out at me. The article also went on to quote, I think, the World Forum Competitive or Economic Forum, the World Economic Forum report. When you read that report, there is no mention in there whatsoever of any ranking. This is what is known, I've come to know now, as something called clickbait that exists in the world of social media, where people set up these articles that appear to look legitimate on certain sites, but it is really mischief. And Mr. National Nuisance is the one who pumped this out to the media, who unfortunately, rather than do their homework and go behind it and check to see whether there were proper measurements, international measurements, ran with the story. All I said at the time is it struck me that there seemed to be no objective measurements, and I questioned it. A little bit of work done subsequent to that shows that the reports that that article refers to for Trinidad and Tobago do not do any comparative analysis. So once again, the country has been traumatized. They've been led down the wrong path. And again, I ask you to just note where it comes from. This administration is very much in favor of freedom of press, freedom of discussion and these types of things. At no point in time have I ever suggested there should be any censorship. However, what I ask the population to do is just be aware that very irresponsible people continue to try to mislead you, and all you have to do is a little bit of homework to ensure whether what you're being shown on social media is true or not. Another one that occurred in the last couple of days was a video of a news reporter talking about murders that had just taken place and the killing of a mother and a young baby, etc., etc., at a time when the country was already experiencing some horrific acts of violence against our citizens. This is being done by the opposition to create a sense of panic. Immediately upon receiving that video, I was able to tell people it is not true in terms of it is not something that is happening currently, because it was CTV News. There is no more CTV News. We have launched TTT. TTT News is what is the current news. So looking at that just down in the bottom part of the video, one could immediately ascertain that it was not a current situation. Citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, I give you the assurance that this administration and this government is not into those types of games. I don't know if it's cheap politics. I really can't describe it. We are working along with the police service. Tomorrow in Parliament, the House of Representatives, we start at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's going to be a full day of debate with respect to the Diosaran report, and then a Joint Select Committee on National Security led by Minister Hines and the police service. We are the first administration in a long time to appoint a commissioner of police, and that is having a positive effect in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. The government, as I've said time and time again in the past few weeks, stands fully in support of our Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the other arms of law enforcement, once they operate within the parameters of the law. And again, I call upon those irresponsible persons out there, and they're not going to listen, and all they're going to do coming out of this, the national nuisance will go and create a whole set of memes and flood the whole social media with his type of behavior we've come to expect from him. Members of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, this administration will continue to press on and to do its work unafraid, unintimidated, to try and secure better on a daily basis our citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. At this stage, I'd like to pass over to my colleagues for them to discuss with us what they've come here to deal with.
I'm sure that Minister Young has left you with many questions that you wish to answer, so permit me to address us on a few more issues, and then we can take questions in the round with Minister Hines, of course, adding in a certain perspective that he will. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been following the media coverage in relation to the passage of the Income Tax Amendment Bill. Very interestingly, we've seen coverage, in fact, in today's Guardian, under the hand of Gail Alexander, who's here with us this afternoon. There was a reporting of a press conference held by the opposition in relation to the Income Tax Amendment Bill. And permit me for a moment to start off by telling you what you have been told. Quite spectacularly, Saddam Hussein, the UNC senator himself, in the company of Rodney Charles and Fazal Karim, had this to say, as is quoted in Ms. Alexander's article. He said, it's quoted here, Hussein said the JSE's explanations were that the income tax bill applied only to exchange of information to the EU states, and the government is now proposing all tax-paying information would be available to the Trinidad and Tobago Police and the FIU without any court order. He questioned why the government was overreaching. Listen to this. If you get a cuss case or any minor case, if the police wish, they can seek your taxpayer information. It dangerously exposes and engenders citizens' information which aren't required by the EU. That is what a sitting senator who is an attorney at law, who has had the report of the Joint Select Committee and who has in his possession the draft legislation, the bill, for 6 months in his hand. That is what Senator Saddam Hussein, trumpeted as a young bright spark by the UNC, had to say. I want to point you to this. The legislation itself, specifically in the bill, sets out at clause 5 of the bill that there is to be an amendment. And listen to what the law actually says. You can, it says here at clause 5, and I'll read the top bit for you. Section 4 of the Income Tax Act is amended, and then it goes on in subsection A to say, in subsection 4, by deleting something, and then by inserting something. When we get down to the insertions, it specifically says, firstly, that the Board of Inland Revenue's secrecy provision will not apply where there is an ongoing criminal matter which relates to proceeds of crime and anti-terrorism. It then goes on to say that notwithstanding subsections 1 and 2, a person having an official duty being employed in the Act shall provide a taxpayer information to the FIU. The FIU, as you know, is bound by secrecy provisions. And this is what it says. Sections 1 and 2, that is the secrecy provisions, do not apply where you're providing taxpayer information to a member of the police service of the rank of superintendent or above attached to the division or unit of the TTPS responsible for financial investigations or fraud solely for the purposes of investigating matters under the Proceeds of Crime Act and Anti-Terrorism Act, the laying of information, or the preferring of an indictment, where such information can reasonably be regarded as being necessary for the purpose of ascertaining the circumstances in which an offense under any written law may have been committed. Now, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, what I've just read to you that the law says, the rule of law in statutory interpretation is that the law must be read as a whole. The top part of the law specifically limits the application of this law only to fraud and financial investigation, and specifically the law points to the Proceeds of Crime Act and Anti-Terrorism Act. For Senator Saddam Hussein to hold himself up as a serious lawyer in this country, to say that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service can, on a cuss case, get your tax-paying information, warrants a return of his LLB. His legal qualifications ought to be revoked for making that kind of statement. And I don't say that lightly to a young man, but that is a gross, irresponsible misrepresentation of the law. And for him, as the only sitting lawyer in that press conference yesterday, to make that submission is an indictment not only on the UNC's legal prowess, but on the leader of the opposition to have chosen that young man to make that ridiculous submission in law. So let's start off with that. The UNC has gone further to say that the Minister of Finance, and this came from Rodney Charles, made a submission that there was something that he was going to, that he had received something in writing from the Global Forum. I want to refer you again in fact-checking, as Minister Young has urged you to do today. I want you to go to the minutes of the third meeting of the Joint Select Committee, held on the 29th of August 2018, and I want you to go to page 5. And at page 5, you will see that what Mr. Rodney Charles has alleged the Minister of Finance to have said appears nowhere in the verbatim report. Again, Mr. Charles has brought himself to the public domain to tell what can only be an untruth. And I'm being very polite when I say it that way. Let's go a little further. Ladies and gentlemen, today the Cabinet approved 2 particular notes. The first note involves the attendance of Trinidad and Tobago's representative at the Global Forum meeting to be held on the 20th and 22nd of November this month in Punta del Este, Maldonado in Uruguay. At that meeting, Trinidad and Tobago is going to have to sit at a table and report that it has failed to pass legislation. Let me repeat that. On the 20th to the 22nd of November this month, there will be the 11th Global Forum plenary meeting held in Uruguay. Trinidad and Tobago, as the opposition is well aware, because they were told by the government over the course of the 6 months that we have been debating this Joint Select Committee's work, and they were told also by the Global Forum representatives themselves, who we asked to go and meet the opposition. They were warned that Trinidad and Tobago had to appear before the Global Forum plenary in November, which is why in Parliament we said that the legislation to amend the Income Tax Act had to be passed this month. Trinidad and Tobago at that plenary will be able to report that we are attempting and hopefully are very close to the passage of the Income Tax Amendment Act, because it is only with the Income Tax Amendment Act that we will be allowed to sign on to the multilateral treaty. The second meeting that the Cabinet approved was Trinidad and Tobago's attendance at the plenary for the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force to be held in Barbados in the period the 19th of November to the 23rd of November. And that's a delegation which I will head. Now let me put this into context for you. The Income Tax Amendment Act has two purposes. On the first limb, it has three subsets. The Income Tax Amendment Act is intended to treat with our obligations under FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, which includes the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. Secondly, to treat with our obligations under the the FATCA legislation, and that is to treat with our automatic information exchange with the United States of America. And thirdly, it is intended to treat with the Global Forum obligations. The second limb of the Income Tax Amendment Act is intended to treat with corruption, in particular at the Proceeds of Crime Act and the Anti-Terrorism Act. Now I want to point this out to you to tell you that at the Global Forum plenary, which is to be held this month in Uruguay, on the agenda specifically, if you go and you pull, again, fact check me, look at the agenda, it's published. At the agenda, we are going to have to specifically speak about securing a level playing field with the Global Forum tax transparency standards. They are looking at not only the implementation of automatic exchange of information, but they are specifically looking at the safeguards and the effectiveness of tax transparency from a corruption point of view. And they are looking at these standards in developing countries. Ladies and gentlemen, both of these obligations are painted now squarely. But the issue that the UNC has also raised, because I've debunked two of their issues so far, they have alleged that this government has not done in the 3 years that we've been in office what they allege we ought to have done. And they have somehow said that because we have come to Parliament in the income tax amendment debate which we had on Friday, they've said that we should have come sooner. And they allege that we have not done what we should do. Let me debunk that by facts. First of all, the commitment to sign on to Global Forum happened with the Pair 1 review in 2010. In 2011, by cabinet decision of Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar, we joined the Global Forum. In 2013 and 2014, by cabinet decision of Kamla Persad-Bissessar, she as Prime Minister approved Larry Hawaii as Minister of Finance, finding himself at taxpayers' expense in Germany, Berlin, and there he gave a commitment that we would have automatic exchange of information and tax transparency in the Global Forum standard. Mrs. Persad-Bissessar's government undertook that we would negotiate 13 separate income tax exchange agreements with 13 separate countries, and they did absolutely nothing. The government that is in occupation of office now, the PNM government, this government, entered in 2015. In October 2015, we immediately sought an extension of time from the Global Forum. Secondly, we engaged the Global Forum in a meeting held in Georgia, the state of Georgia, in Europe, and we asked for Trinidad and Tobago to be put upon the fast-track process. In the fast-track process, we gave high-level commitment, and we, this government, said we wish to join the multilateral convention. That would avoid us having to spend years in trying to negotiate 13 separate versions of FATCA-type agreements. We entered into that process. The Global Forum specifically told us, bring your legislation. We brought the legislation, we laid the legislation in 2017, but what we had to do was to take the work which we did with FATCA into account, which, as you know, we did in 2016 and 2017. So we went to meetings, we joined the fast track, we gave the global commitment, we avoided having to negotiate 13 bilateral treaties with 13 countries, and we drafted the legislation, and we sat with the Global Forum team and reviewed the legislation, specifically 3 bills that went to a joint select committee, and were 3 bills laid in the Parliament 6 months ago. In the Joint Select Committee, we gave an update to the opposition and independent bench. By unanimous agreement, they agreed that we can report the income tax amendment bill to the Parliament as we did. They have all of a sudden said that they are not prepared to support. Senator Saddam Hussein, who I now have serious questions about in terms of his legal ability, has said to the country that they have concern about the judicial supervision that should exist for the release of taxpayer information to the Trinidad and Tobago police, not for cus cases as he put, because that is an absurd reading of the law, but instead for proceeds of crime and money laundering and anti-terrorism. We on the committee meeting as a whole on last Friday in Parliament asked the opposition bench on 7 separate occasions what their concern was. We indicated on the floor in the debate of the report and in the committee stage that we too would be minded to allow for judicial supervision for the TTPS having access to taxpayer information for the very specific purpose of proceeds of crime, money laundering, fraud, etc. And the opposition refused to answer. Senator Hussain, in the article carried under the hand of Gail Alexander, has indicated now that they are prepared to consider the judicial supervision. And ladies and gentlemen, with one issue on the table, the Minister of Finance will be putting the government's position in writing, and we will do the work for them. In the case where they refuse to draft any amendments or submissions, we will send them an amendment for consideration. We have an opportunity as a country, if we pass the Income Tax Amendment Act, the amendment will allow us negotiating room to demonstrate Trinidad and Tobago's good faith at the Global Forum. But please bear in mind that at the FATF and CFATF, we also have an immediate obligation to amend the Income Tax Amendment Act. Specifically, the FATF has said that we must have law enforcement transparency. I referred in the Parliament to the specific sections of the Mutual Evaluation Report put into the public domain since 2015. So I am informing today there is no reason for the return of this legislation to a Joint Select Committee. The work that is in the Joint Select Committee is work which Trinidad and Tobago's government has worked on together with the Global Forum. That work product has been approved by the Global Forum. It is work which the FATF requires. It is work which which FATCA requires as well. There is nothing required other than for common sense, decency, and honesty to prevail, particularly in an environment where what the opposition says is intellectually absurd. I can tell you that I have met with the Bankers Association's representatives. I've spoken with them on the phone. I have met with, last night, the Chamber of Commerce as well, and I am heartened and warmed by their support in their call to the opposition to just get on with doing the work. This has nothing to do with any obstacle by the government. It is something which has to do with the opposition refusing to do the people's work, and more than that, to erect arguments which are absurd in law, as the cus case example from Senator Hussain demonstrates. I know that Minister Hines would like to address you on one small point associated with this and certain other matters. So I'll pass to him, and then we can take your questions in the round.
Thank you very much. I merely wanted, for the benefit of the public, to understand a little better what this amendment to the Income Tax Act is really all about. It is Section 4 of that act, which provides generally for confidentiality on the part of those who come into information by virtue of their employment in the Inland Revenue Department. We had a situation in this country some time ago where the police were investigating a matter touching and concerning taxation. And as I say that, I must remind the public that taxation is very important as citizens call for more resources for schools and for roads and for the police and for the regiment and for the hospitals and so on. It is government taxes that will finance these things. Everyone would know that in the United States, Uncle Sam doesn't play with his taxes. That was well known even to Al Capone. And of course, FATCA brought that home to Trinidad and Tobago, where the United States engaged in the arrangements with Trinidad and Tobago to ensure that if we had any information about American citizens or companies in respect of business and taxes, well, in respect of any business activity here, America is entitled to her taxes, and she wants to know what this is, because millions of US dollars are lost by people who go outside of America and hide these. And of course, it's reciprocal for the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So taxes are very important in this sense. And in this particular case, the police were investigating a matter and encountered an objection on the basis of that Section 4, which said that those in the Inland Revenue Department did not have to reveal any information to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. And while the UNC, Saddam Hussein and Rodney Charles and others, purport and pretended to be speaking on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago and pretend that they want us to have good law that they have been playing around with for the last 6 months, law that, as the Attorney General and Minister Young indicated, they cannot intellectually sustain an argument for not supporting. As I put it colloquially, scratching around, searching around in the wind for good reasons. We saw the need, domestically at any rate, for the police. The citizens of this country don't want a black hole in the Inland Revenue Department. They don't want the police to not know about tax evasion. They don't want the police to not know about taxes that are due to the country. For example, if a businessman owed the country $15 million in taxes in a particular year, and someone took a bribe and played around with the figures and caused him to spend only, well, to have a liability, pretentious liability of $1 million, the people of this country would want the police to know that. And therefore, this is very, very important for this reason. So we, recognizing, as has been stated earlier, that they indicated out of the Joint Select Committee that they had a concern with the police getting access to this information, not for any, what did he call it, Sofort case, we call it Sada, Cuss case, but in cases of fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, proceeds of crime. Every sensible or reasonable law-abiding citizen want the police to be able to check on this. So they're not speaking for the public. You would have heard that the business chamber, you would have heard that the FATF in particular, FATF in particular, wants this measure. The only people, the Bankers Association, the only persons who do not or would not want this are those who have something to hide or to worry about. So we drafted and will forward to them an amendment to put in this judicial layer where the police superintendent, no less a rank, who goes to the Inland Revenue to get information in the context of which we have been speaking, must first approach a judge of the High Court who will authorize or fail to authorize such a request. This is all the more important, ladies and gentlemen, in circumstances where last year the FIU, the Financial Intelligence Unit, established under law, paid for, and sworn by the people of Trinidad and Tobago, they too cannot have access to tax information. It makes no sense. They too would like this amendment to that secrecy provision to be effected. And this is simply what this is all about. In the context of a situation where last year the FIU reported to the Parliament, as it must under law annually, that it discovered $22 billion worth of suspicious transactions. That in 1 year, that has to be investigated. And in order to investigate that, the FIU and the police who are engaged in those kinds of investigation would want to get behind this secrecy clause. And the EU, seeing what had happened with the case that I told you about a while ago, told the government of Trinidad and Tobago, which is why we are in the Parliament with this measure in part, told the government that when that kind of black hole, when that exists in your country, our citizens could hide behind it here too, and it will be of no value to us or the 153 of us. And therefore, we present this with an amendment for the benefit of the UNC, and we have our very good suspicions as to why they don't wish to support it. We've seen their behavior time and time again, but we want the people of Trinidad and Tobago to understand we are here and on the front line trying to protect your interests, because you contribute to this tax pool, and you need to know, you need to find out if anybody has been interfering with it. We'll take any questions that you might have going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Jewel. Sorry, Ria.
Well, the UNC has said that they want all the three bills together. So is it that you all are saying, no, you're definitely not doing that?
Let me just explain that quickly. The reason why we were not blacklisted by FATCA, as an example, is because we signed on to the intergovernmental agreement. We signed on to that treaty. And then we brought that treaty to make it local law under the Tax Information Exchange Act. What we have here, Trinidad and Tobago, is the only country in the entire Global Forum pot that is 100% non-compliant. We are the only country. The Global Forum has said to us, you can sign on to the multilateral treaty, which is the equivalent of the intergovernmental agreement for FATCA, if you amend your Income Tax Act. That will take us out of being fully 100% the only country in the world of Global Forum that is non-compliant, and allow us now to be partially compliant. So it takes us away from the process flow of being 100% dead against it to Trinidad and Tobago is making progress. Let me explain one other point. The other two bills, one is the mutual assistance sort of formula, and the other one is the double taxation. These bills are going to require a little bit more thought to take time, specifically because under the double taxation arrangements and the other bill, we're talking about the removal of free zones, which is a recent thing by the Global Forum, and the move into special economic zones. For Trinidad and Tobago, this is a very important issue because you can incentivize your industrial estates by having certain free zone concessions. So our trade and commerce factors are impacted in that consideration of the other two bills. One of those bills is 188 pages long. Let me put it squarely. If the UNC couldn't consider 4 pages of a bill with 10 simple clauses in 6 months, how long do you really expect they're going to take to do 188 pages in one of the bills? If Saddam Hussein cannot wrap his mind around the difference between the Proceeds of Crime Act, the anti-terrorism legislation, and confuse that with Cuscase, how do you expect them to really grasp the issues inside of the other two things in the time? For that reason, common sense dictates. And the Global Forum has said to us, pass your Income Tax Amendment Act, and at least you're moving out of non-compliance in that process. The Minister of Finance was very, very clear to Rodney Charles at the 3rd meeting of the Joint Select Committee. I invite you to go and look at the verbatim, where the Minister of Finance specifically informed Mr. Charles that there was a process of moving out of the non-compliance. Mr. Charles, all on his own, but in typical UNC style, has converted that into something that it is not. The Minister of Finance did not say what Mr. Charles reported he said. So I hope that assists.
The country that they are prepared to work non-stop.
So yes, yeah, sure. This is the same UNC that refused to attend the Joint Select Committees over the recess period when all other Joint Select Committees can sit. They boycotted the Joint Select Committees. That was reported in the media. So I think we ought to judge the UNC by their actions and not their words. I think most respectfully that this Income Tax Amendment Act is a very simple bill. There is one issue on the table. And let me remind you of a very important point. A Joint Select Committee is at most populated by, let's say, 11 people. It is not a substitution for the Committee of the Whole of the House of Representatives. In the House of Representatives, you have 41 members that each have a microphone and that can consider the law in the Committee of the Whole. That's where we are now. There is one issue on the table which the government has said, as Minister Hines said, we will draft for the UNC. If after 6 months they cannot put pen to paper, we will draft it for them. And there is nothing complicated. What is required is for us to go back to that Committee of the Whole, but the country needs to have an assurance from the UNC that they will be prepared to support the legislation. It cannot be linked to the longer work products. It would be irresponsible to ignore the direct advice of the Global Forum that you amend the Income Tax Act. There is one small amendment to be factored. If we have that in gear, we can move ourselves out of non-compliance in the process towards compliance.
And if I may just add very quickly, they are also saying, yes, as you indicated, Ria, they want all three together. But I heard Saddam Hussein say publicly this morning that they agree in principle with the amendments that are before the House. If you agree in principle, if you know that you want this amendment which we are offering you, the other two are as long as 188 pages, as you would have just heard. They want us to take it back to the Joint Select Committee, which would effectively bury it past the 30th of November, which is the deadline. It doesn't make sense. And the AG has just reminded us that the full 41-member House can, in a full committee, the Joint Select Committee representing 41, say what you want, but they have not presented one amendment. This is why I am so embarrassed, and I feel sorry for the people of Trinidad and Tobago to have us parliamentarians who you elect and who you pay to come here to be going through this story with the UNC every time a measure comes to the parliament that requires a majority, a special majority. They take these positions and put this country through this process. On this occasion, it comes down to one simple, singular matter. That is, do you want, as you stated in your minority report, judicial intervention before you give the police? And if you want that, here it is. There is no reason to go. And as for the other two, the EU, the Global Forum, as has been said before, made it abundantly clear to Trinidad and Tobago, once you get past the income tax amendment, you can go on and sign the agreement and you can proceed in the medium term from there.
And let me just remind you, the reason that other countries have passed this, the reason that everybody else in the Global Forum is not non-compliant, sorry to use a double negative, is because they don't have the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago with the requirement for special majority. That just doesn't exist. So the rest of the world cannot understand why our country is not passing the law. In fact, they look at us and say, we fail to understand why you are not motivated to change your law. And how far outside of Trinidad and Tobago can one go and say, there's a party called the UNC, ask them? I'd like to ask the media a simple question, a simple favor. Ask the UNC if they have submitted a single amendment to this bill. Ask them that simple point, and then ask to see it. And ask them when they sent it, if they sent anything at all. I think that'll put an end to the entire story.
only seen when you sit to deliberate on the other two bills?
What will happen if the Income Tax Act amendment is passed is that we will be able to sign on to the multilateral treaty. If we can sign on to the multilateral treaty, we'll be allowed to perfect what they call BEPS, the Base Erosion Agreement Factors for Harmful Tax Practices. So we move out from being non-compliant into this country is demonstrating by its action that it is moving towards compliance, and therefore countries are encouraged not to apply full-on sanctions and countermeasures against your financial sector.
I was trying to strike a balance between complying with these countries and their requirements, and protecting public interest. And there seems to be a view that not enough time was given to scrutinize these bills.
Sure. So let's answer that squarely. Enough time? Surely the period between 2010 to 2018 is a lot of time. Secondly, surely 6 months to consider 10 clauses on 4 pages is a whole lot of time. Surely the Global Forum, having come and sat down with the UNC, as it did with the government, and explained to them that this had to be done, was more than adequate notice. Let's be sensible. The fourth estate is the media, a very important role. What you are reporting is the he say, she say. You are not going to the source documents. None of you are genuinely fact-checking what we are saying. I've pointed you to where you can fact-check me. I've given you page number, I've given you report, I've given you volume. You need to do the homework. Prove me to be saying the truth or not. But what I can tell you is if you fact-check the UNC, you'll understand your story is not he say, she say. PNM say, UNC say. It's what is required. And I challenge you to do that.
Stakeholder input in terms of like the bankers, John Public.
Bankers Association has come out public and said they 100% support the legislation. But of course we have. And I must tell you this. Well, perhaps you have missed it, but I'll remind you that they have put out a public statement to that effect. The Board of Inland Revenue is involved in this process. The FIU is involved in this process. The Global Forum is involved in this process. Last night, I sat with the Chamber of Commerce and its executive team. They are all involved in this process. The only people who seem not to be involved in this process, at times, 100% is the UNC, and at times the media.
Given that you've said that there's no reason to return to the GSC, are you going to chance taking this bill to the House?
As I said before, very clearly, the country needs to hear from the UNC what they agree to. Let me remind you this. FATCA, anti-terrorism, anti-gang, all were passed only after we effectively shamed the UNC out by writing to them to say, show us what you want in writing. Dance, 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 they could not, until eventually we got something in writing. When they agreed to it in writing, the debate was over.
For the deadline date, you did say it was November.
Yes.
The UNC, however, presented a document suggesting that the deadline date for the
that the letter written by the Minister of Finance at that point was a tentative time frame. The Global Forum wanted to hear from us. Number one, have you got legislation? That was satisfied because they received it and then started working on it together with the government. Number two, they said, when do you expect that you'll be able to treat this in your parliament? And the expectation that was communicated was that we could deal with the debates in June of 2018. Let me remind you, we laid the bills and went into a joint select committee in May 2018. That is before June. So we went to Parliament 1 month before the Minister of Finance said we would in fact be there. So I don't know what they're talking about. Again, I ask you to fact check. When you see the letter and you see that they're pointing to June 2018, you should remind them, hold on, your joint select committee happened in May 2018. So these are abundantly clear and simple issues. November is the deadline because I've just given you the cabinet's decision, and I ask you again to fact check me. Global Forum meeting is to be held, the 11th Global Forum plenary meeting, November 20th to 22nd, 2018, in Punta del Este, Maldonado in Uruguay. Secondly, Caribbean Financial Action Task Force meeting, plenary and working group meetings, Bridgetown, Barbados, November 19th to 23rd, 2018. I'm not making this up. These are facts in the public domain. I'm asking the Fourth Estate to chime into something that affects us all. We are mere functionaries in the government. It is for people to care about what happens to their country to have a voice. The Bankers Association has come out and said to the opposition, please support the income tax amendment. The commitment from the Chamber of Commerce last night was the same, and I understand that they'll be going public as well. All that I ask you to do is to ask them, where are your amendments? Have you sent the amendments? Let's see a copy of it. Ask them that. How hard could it be to put down a couple lines on a piece of paper?
Understood that the exchange of information is mutual and this legislation should work in our favor as well. Are you aware of if any of the relevant bodies do in fact have a list of persons who they would be investigating or requesting information?
No, I'm not permitted to be aware. I have no knowledge, and nor do I have any line of sight into that. I'm not a member of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. I do not serve in the Financial Intelligence Unit, and I am not a member under the Board of Inland Revenue and the income tax provisions. I function as the Attorney General under the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago with a specific authority, which includes none of that.
Ensure then that these bodies are equipped and ready to.
What I can tell you, which is a matter of public record, and I'm sitting next to main players in this game, Minister Young and Minister Hines. It is no secret that there is a significant amount of corruption information that is currently before the courts of Trinidad and Tobago. And dare I say that when you get the whole story behind that, you'll perhaps be able to backfill this story of opposition. That's all that I'll say, but that's in the realm of the Attorney General's office. So connect the dots for yourself.
Close, and you can correct me here if I'm wrong in any way. There's a part where it refers to the preparing of an indictment where such information can be reasonably be regarded as being necessary for the purpose of ascertaining the circumstances to which an offense under any written law may have been committed. I think that is where the opposition. Yes.
So that's what we call the choiseul of the law, which in French means the shoe. It is, a law is read this way. If you look at it, Jewel, if you look at it with me, subclause B, which is what you're reading from, starts off with what? It's a header. It's called the chapeau, the top piece of it, meaning the hat. Provide taxpayer information to a member of the TTPS, etc., division, etc., for financial investigation or fraud solely for the purposes of 1, proceeds of crime, anti-terrorism, 2, laying information, 3, preferring an indictment, and here's the tail end of it. The tail end says what you've just referred to. When you read the law, and there's umpteen precedent for this, there's case law for this, there are textbooks on this, you read it with the header first, the middle second, and the tail end third. So you can't pluck out the tail end and go there. There's a principle of law called a justum generis. It means the thing follows that which happened before. So if I tell you all animals which are canines, which are small breed dogs, I can't pluck out animals to say it means everything else, horses, giraffe, etc. We're talking about dogs. So you have to qualify the language of the law. Now this is, I want to remind you, Senator Hussain and others went to law school, you know. They've been in the parliament now for 3 years. There's a textbook called Bennion on statutory interpretation. There's a famous case called Pepper versus Hart that every law school student knows about. I don't need to read and spell that to somebody who has the privilege of being called a senator of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. This is ABCs.
In general, so thereby seeking clarification from those who are lawyers, such as yourself. The senator has made a point. What question I was trying to put to you was, or is rather, that whether there was anything in this clause as if,
which could include a cus case.
Not just a matter of that, that could allow for any potential abuse of acquiring taxpayer information. The concern that has been raised, at least by the opposition, is that because of misuse in certain elements of the police service, the corruption or whatever else, the concern about whether there is a safeguard.
Understood. So let me put it to you this way. The Joint Select Committee produced a report. In that report, we on the floor of the Parliament in debating the report said we understand, having seen the opposition's statement about judicial understanding, by plucking the South African law out, we understand that there's a concern. Intellectually and from a legal point of view, I referred to why the South African example is not necessarily a perfect example, but then the Minister of Finance and I and the Prime Minister, all three of us said we are prepared to agree to judicial supervision. Minister Hines just gave you the example of how it will work. So if we are agreed that there should be judicial supervision, in default of the UNC sending even a line of amendment, we've drafted the amendment. So if that's the only issue on the table and we agree to it, why can't we pass the law? It's as simple as that.
The amendment be presented either to the Parliament or the opposition? How does that work?
Well, we're going to Parliament tomorrow to debate the Diosaran report, the report of the Joint Select Committee chaired by Minister Hines. And we'll be in Parliament again on Wednesday. And we expect, we hope that responsibility will reside in the UNC hearts at some point, and that they will return to us in writing to say, okay, we agree with your amendment. The minute they say yes, we convene the Parliament. And that is a matter of a day or two. I mean, it really is in their court. How much more can you beg for the UNC to simply just put their position in writing? They're being paid, as are we, by the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago to go to Parliament and do this work. If they don't want to do the work, they have the option to resign. We are pleading with the opposition to do their job, which they are receiving the taxpayers' dollars to do. And it's just as simple as that.
And you know, if I may, they got us far, in particular, to argue against these measures, as your colleague says, hinted a while ago, on the basis of this vague concept of sovereignty. He was arguing that when you bow to FATCA and you bow to the Global Forum, Trinidad and Tobago loses its sovereignty. It's the same Botiwari and others who talk about the need for foreign direct investment and the economy must be buoyant and we live in a global world and all of that. And it's the same Botiwari and Saddam Hussein and they who understand that the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago over the last 3-4 decades have grown accustomed to a very high standard of living, largely maintained by imported goods and services, which of course is not altogether the most desirable state of affairs, but that's our reality.
But it's the same UNC that signed by cabinet approval the agreement to do that which they now complain about.
Correct.
It's as simple as that.
And the day this thing hits the fan, if the threat that we now face comes real, all of, as we said before in FATCA, but I must remind the citizens, even those who support the UNC and who voted them into opposition, they must understand that if your daughter is studying in the United States or your son, or you want to import a car part, or you want to import something online, any transaction, because the entire banking system would be affected and it would bring hardship. I reminded a few persons this morning, in 1981, in the midst of an elections in the island of Jamaica, the food shelves went completely empty, and you run the risk of that sort of thing here. So we are only doing this, the begging and the pleading. I just want the country to know, as I conclude, we are not doing this because of us as individuals and personally. We are doing this on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago so that your lives could continue apace and we would not be blacklisted and treated in the way we would be treated in.
All right,
in
members of the media, do you all have any other questions? Because we need to wrap up.
The Global Forum was here prior to May 28th and after. They've been in continuous working sessions. David Lee, as the chief whip, confirmed on the Parliament floor that they met with the Global Forum.
How is that in any way connected to the plans for the Revenue Authority?
I noticed that Mr. Charles said he would like to hear from the BIR and the proposed revenue authority.
The BIR sat together with the Global Forum.
Ria, let's be real now. Something that doesn't exist, how do you hear from it? Ask Toppy, Mr. Charles, that. How can you hear from something that does not exist? The Revenue Authority has not yet been put into place. So ask Mr. Charles if by spinning the wheel or some Ouija board, he could get a response from them.
What's the harm in going back to the GSC?
The harm is, as I've told you, perhaps I ought to just remind you, the dates are the 20th and 22nd for the Global Forum meeting, and the dates are the 19th to the 23rd for the FATF meeting, CFATF. We are today at the 8th of November. So by the time we get through the dance of who could come to the JSC and who not come in, and which parliament day available, and go through all of that, when are we going to get the work done? What's so hard about one line from the UNC putting their position in writing? I think we ought to bring this to a close respectfully on this issue, because I'm sure you have other points. I'm just asking you to ask a few questions that I have respectfully suggested that you ought to the UNC about this issue.
Mr. Young, do you have a cost on getting those interceptors back up and running?
Just over $6 million for 14 interceptors.
Deal with, well, making the borders less porous, right? What about the treating of illegals who are already in the country?
Well, the law already treats them, as you're aware. We have a detention center. As soon as law enforcement officers pick them up, we try to process them and deal with them. It is an issue. I saw the suggestion that I said we have no refugee crisis. We don't have a refugee crisis. What we have is persons who are coming in through our porous borders, and we are taking steps from a national security perspective to deal with them. And this is just one pillar towards dealing with that.
With homicides.
I saw that suggestion by a counselor about migrant camps. No, what I read, and I could have it wrong, is that he wrote and he engaged the Red Cross. Once again, a typical UNC tactic to go and try and engage. You would recall when we had come back from Australia, the Prime Minister led delegation, and we had told the country even before going there and whilst we were there, and when we came back, that we had engaged the Australian government, the Australian Economic Finance Bank, EFIC, as well as Austal and INCAT to get Cape-class vessels, etc., that the national nuisance wrote to the opposition in Australia. So this is typical of these busybodies. They like to write to international organizations, not recognizing or appreciating the effects that can have on Trinidad and Tobago's image.
Permit me to just butt in for a second. I have met repeatedly, as has Minister Young, with the United Nations human rights entities and with the International Red Cross. And I can tell you, in none of our discussions as government to agency have we ever heard the concept of migrant camps. Because Trinidad and Tobago can receive people lawfully. There's nothing to stop you from coming through a port of entry and being declared under our laws as being permitted to stay in the jurisdiction for the time that they give you. For instance, people from Venezuela can enter without a visa and stay here for 90 days. What we do have is the facility, like every other country in the world, like the United States, like elsewhere, where you have to comply with the laws. So you can stay here lawfully, you can enter lawfully, you can extend your period of time. If you are illegal in the country, you can be voluntarily repatriated. In other words, then you agree to go home, or you can be deported. And it's as simple as that.
The system is not dealing enough with the issue of those who are here illegally. In other words, dealing with it on that level.
There are always challenges. So what we're facing now is a system that is dealing with it. I mean, what you saw, I assume you're assuming with referring to the video, is you saw people coming, illegally entering. Immediately, those persons were picked up and they're now being processed and this type of thing. Yes, there are deficiencies in the system, which is why I said I'll be bringing initiatives to the cabinet, etc. You're seeing one of the first ones, which is the increase in interceptors. It is multifaceted. You have to increase the protection on the borders. This is only one of the incidents. There are other things that we're doing in our national security, some of which can't be spoken about, etc. From an immigration point of view, we are trying to uplift there with the immigration, the processing, as soon as the immigration become aware of it, and sometimes there's police doing raids on some of these places, then we deal with it. And we are in constant communication, if they're Venezuelans, with the Venezuelan authorities as to how it can be dealt with, etc.
And remember, we watch the issue of trafficking in persons very carefully, the importation of arms and ammunition and drugs. And therefore, the government has to take a very strict approach to compliance with the law, because you have a lawful opportunity to enter. You do not have the privilege of being unlawful in your entry, and that has to be measured and treated with. And on the refugee and asylum seeker issue, there's a process that they go through. So if you apply on that end, they process you. They consider whether you are granted that status of asylum seeker or refugee, and at most, in moving you to another country, because that's what they do, they don't keep you here. They move at most 40 people per year. So if you have thousands of people, Trinidad and Tobago is fostering the care for those people, education, health, social services, and you're moving 40 people per year. So the taxpayers of this country rely upon the enforcement of the law because we have limited resources. We are, of course, our brother's keepers, and we are assisting in the best way we can.
In a system that is supposed to identify vessels and so on that shouldn't be not
Some of
authorized.
the vessel you saw, that was a small vessel. It was a pirogue, to be blunt. So you have a number of legal Trinidadian fishing vessels, pirogues, etc. And that is why I say it's multifaceted. The radar is another pillar that will assist. But once you get things like the interceptors, we are also increasing police patrols in some of these places. What you're going to see happening is going to be intelligence driven, because we do, persons know, like you heard the counselor say, he knows what is going on, etc., etc. All right, but what was done with respect to the authorities? Did he go and make reports to the police station down there, etc.? So what we're doing is we're tackling it. We know their issues. I have asked the heads of security in my weekly meeting this week to produce for me by the end of this month a structure and a plan for an increase in border security.
Questions, because I know one, the issue of the number of homicides that have occurred recently. You have the commissioner appointed, he has been saying that they're doing their best to deal with crime and whatnot, but the issue of homicides it continues to be a challenge.
And that's exactly it. It is a challenge. What I can tell you is, at this stage, there's been no intelligence connecting of the dots between those unfortunate issues of homicide. As I've said repeatedly, every single citizen who is murdered is of concern to us. The intelligence doesn't suggest any interrelation, etc. I can tell you over the weekend when it had started and going into the Diwali, we had an emergency meeting on Saturday where the police and the other arms of law enforcement put in place some plans to try and flush out some areas, etc. That continues. Yesterday there was a National Security Council meeting chaired by the Prime Minister where we called in he asked to meet with all of the heads of divisions, all of the deputy commissioners. We actually had 28 of the top end of the police force there, and discussions with respect to them and the type of support they have from the government.
The other question is with regard to the Petrotrin issue that you raised earlier. So the government there's a determination now as to how many people will be employed in these four subsidiaries.
It hasn't changed. As you've heard from day one, it was 800 for I think Heritage and 200 for Paria. There's still going to be a need to populate the holding company and then some of the other areas as well, because with the Petrotrin itself and the legacy issues. So that is a question best directed to the board of Petrotrin, and they would be able to provide that information. But we haven't received at our cabinet level any change in the plan.
Yes, as you know, persons who will have been separated from Petrotrin can reapply to these companies.
Absolutely, not as best as I know. Anybody can apply, right? There have been public advertisements. There's a process that is in place. You put in your applications for the various positions. You're then shortlisted, and there's an interview evaluation process thereafter.
There was a report of someone already hired in an executive position. Could you give any?
Again, national nuisance. I saw where that came from as well. Mr. Wiley was hired, if I'm not mistaken, at least a month and a half, maybe even 2 months ago. he was part of this process. He's a highly qualified person in exploration and production. So he is heading up the exploration and production side of Petrotrin, which is where the experts have said this new entity will survive, because basically he's going in the ground, pulling up the oil, Trinidad and Tobago's oil, and selling it on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And he is an expert in that area. We were lucky to have the board to have recruited him in our interaction with him, because they've come and presented to Cabinet. He seems like someone who knows what it is he's doing, and we're glad to have him on board. All right.
The question there, please. Now, slightly going to the law and order portfolio that you have, I wanted to ask if your ministry still runs the mentorship program and citizen security program.
The citizen security program has been under review for a while now, and Cabinet will have to take a decision as to its future going forward. Yes, I know there are mentorship programs in the Ministry of National Security. One of the things that I asked the ministry to do is we need to have, I want an analysis done of all of these various programs to make sure there's no duplicity and these other types of things, because I'm very big on value for money.
You understand the spirit of my questions is, yes, law and order, you've got to put a lid on the really hardcore, irredeemable criminal killers.
That is an ingredient towards safety and security, and we recognize that. For example, police youth clubs, the MyLAT program, HYPE, all of these types of programs play a very, very important part in the national security apparatus, and that is something that is forming one of the ingredients of it.
Because, I mean, my thing is that there really needs to be more even, because, I mean, to get into MyLAT, it's like a whole year's wait, and a lot of these things, but things like sports...
It's a whole of government approach as well. So one of the discussions is the education system, what is being done in our schools to assist with the young people, etc. Then you have the social and family services. So these are things that are being looked at.
No, because my thing is that you want to expand it, like the mentorship. I mean, we have our young males are in crisis, and we, as much as we can, like a football team, like a little league of football, even as a six-a-side.
On Saturday to come down the Port of Spain City Corporation and the conclusion of the Daryl Rajpal Cup. So the various communities that know there are these issues taking place, because it doesn't only come down to government, and a government-funded program. There are a lot of positives taking place. I mean, even in looking at that, I've asked them to look at the increase in use of scouts, in cadets, and these types of things. So it is something that we're very aware of, and I'm trying to get that. But it's not to say expand, 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 because with every expansion, there's a cost associated with it. So it's to see what is there, what can be used as a National Crime Prevention Program that Ms. Glenda Jennings-Smith, I've asked her to lead the charge on that. That is actually supposed to be looking at, in each community, these various programs, etc., that can be dealt with. Okay? That's it.
Would the best, or very crazy question, has the government considered going forward in the issue of income tax a model where you have like the IRS in the United States has an enforcement capability? In other words, then it can do its own investigations, it can do its own, is that something?
That exists in law right now. It's called the Board of Inland Revenue, that have a criminal investigative division, etc. So it does exist in law. It's to get people to enforce the law, take it seriously, and very soon the conversation will start with the Revenue Authority and what we intend to do with respect to the Revenue Authority that is in Parliament, and I expect that when we come to debate that, there'll be a lot of interesting discussion. Thank you all very much.